Since childhood, I have lived on this dead-end street in the middle of Walker, Louisiana. Few homes line the pavement on this quarter-mile stretch of roadway. The vast space of emptiness between the houses grows rather dark at night, and with the wooded areas surrounding the neighborhood, Fletcher Lane has the appearance of an old country road deep in the woods. There are no street lights to brighten the nights, no illumination from local businesses. There is only darkness and subtle sounds of silence. Over the years, many families have moved here. Some families moved into the neighborhood and moved away. A few that stayed lived here until their deaths. There are those who died in the very home they lived in. Being such a secluded neighborhood, everyone that lived on Fletcher Lane became like family. A close-knit community, I suppose one could surmise. Given that, when someone passes on to the next world, it has an emotional effect on everyone. I've always been a somewhat spiritual person. Matters of the afterlife and the existence of spirits amongst the living have intrigued me. Though I've had some experiences, for the most part, my personal opinion and theory regarding the supernatural has been limited to the experiences of others. I have developed some opinions from these collective experiences. One is that the fabric between this world and the next is not woven very thick. Another is the belief that emotions play a significant role in the connection between the living and the dead. To what extent, I can only ponder. As a living creature, I understand things of this world, this life. I understand emotions like pain, sadness, happiness, and joy, emotions both good and bad. But what of those who've passed on to the afterlife? Are they here? If so, do they still feel the emotions they did when alive? Do they recognize the living? Do they linger with a sense of fulfillment or solemn loneliness? Do they remember? The answer to these questions I can only theorize. Yet I have experienced events that cannot be explained using logic or rational thought. The story I'm about to tell is a true story, and one that has helped me better understand how to answer these questions. It was the summer of 1973 when my family moved to Fletcher Lane. There was a family living across the street from us, an older couple with a son who had just recently arrived home from the Vietnam War. I was 9 years old then, and immediately discovered an affection for this family. I was especially fond of their son, Tommy. Though he was much older than I, Tommy seemed like the older brother I never had. His tales of the jungles of Vietnam and the experiences of war enthralled the wide-eyed child that I was. For the entire summer of 1973, I became a shadow to Tommy, learning different things. Once he taught me how to make a table from a tree trunk. It was adventurous in a way, and somewhat therapeutic for me since I had left all my friends from the old neighborhood. And since there were no children my age in the neighborhood, following Tommy around was really all there was for me to do. Then one day, as I was helping Tommy cut firewood for the winter, a question arose in my thoughts. A question any child, or any adult for that matter, would wonder. My question was, what's it like to kill somebody? He was splitting logs with an axe when I asked him. At first I thought he was angry with me because he came to a halt in mid-swing and said nothing. I stared for a moment. Sweat dripped from the red bandana wrapped around Tommy's forehead. After a few moments, he gently lowered the axe and looked into the woods with a blank expression on his face. Shame suddenly rushed through my body, and I lowered my head. The dry leaves and twigs covering the ground offered no solace to the way I was feeling. The feeling I had suddenly invaded his privacy washed through my thoughts. But after a few minutes, Tommy looked at me and shared something I'll never forget. He told me a tale of something that happened while he was in Vietnam. At the time, I didn't quite understand the complexity of the events, but as I got older, I did. Tommy explained that he was part of an engineer platoon. Their responsibility was to clear land for troops. The danger of this responsibility was grave, constantly under scrutiny from the enemy, and, without a leader who has experience, their life expectancy was lowered. During Tommy's first few months, their lieutenant was savvy and knowledgeable regarding the operations of the platoon. He listened to his men and made sound tactical decisions that kept the level of danger to a minimum. It was after this lieutenant completed his tour that things got bad. As Tommy explained, the new lieutenant was fresh out of officer training school, and his attitude was arrogant. He wouldn't listen to the soldiers who had been in the jungle for a good period of time. This caused the platoon to be put in dangerous situations, and in some circumstances, men were killed. The stress level of the men grew with each passing day. Nerves were frayed, and they felt drastic measures needed to be taken to rectify the situation. Tommy explained that this lieutenant was unapproachable. When several of the enlisted men attempted to confer with the lieutenant about his mentality and attitude, they were threatened with court-martial. With this form of treatment, the men within the platoon lost trust and faith in their leader. How can a man be expected to follow someone who shows no respect or concern for his subordinates? It was what Tommy explained next that sent chills through my body. Straws were drawn, one man chosen, a deed that must be done. And it was Tommy who was chosen to carry out the deed. It was late and the jungle grew darker as the sun gradually set in the distant western sky. The sky was the color of blood, as Tommy explained. In my mind, I envisioned a dark red sky, the clouds dripping in the western horizon, slowly dripping like blood from a small wound. There was a quiet, solemn mood about the campsite. All the men retreated to their tents, and there they waited. Tommy had set himself away from the other men. Sitting alone beneath a bonsai tree, Tommy waited. He told me his thoughts were nearly absent as he glared into the blood sky. He told me that he heard nothing. No artillery fire in the distance, no sounds that the jungle makes at night. He heard nothing. Nothing but the beating of his own heart as it pounded against the bones in his chest. He had reached such a level of focus and concentration, not even the mosquitoes feasting on the back of his neck were noticeable. And in his hands, as the last glimmer of daylight sank into the jungle, the machete he would use. The nights were as hot as the days in the jungles of Vietnam. Sometimes it would rain, but the rain was warm and offered no relief to the heat. Sweat drenched Tommy's clothes as he rose from beneath the bonsai tree. Each step was calculated and methodical as he eased closer and closer to the lieutenant's tent. If anyone took notice of Tommy, they remained silent. Once he reached the lieutenant's quarters, Tommy listened. There was the faint sound of sleep in the quiet confines. Tommy walked cautiously towards the cot where the lieutenant lay. Once there, and positioned, with just enough light from a lantern hung from the ceiling behind the lieutenant's bed, Tommy did the deed that needed to be done. There was one point during the brief scuffle that ensued where Tommy told me the lieutenant opened his eyes. The glare was horrifying, as Tommy explained. A glare as unnatural as any he had witnessed before or after. From that moment on, Tommy told me he has nightmares about killing the lieutenant. He said there are times he feels as if the spirit of the lieutenant follows him around, haunting his nights. What Tommy said about killing someone, the answer to my question, is it feels like a part of you dies as well. Like an area of your being that makes you feel human is suddenly gone. And it creates a place in your heart where there is emptiness. He told me it was difficult to explain, and it was even more difficult for a 9-year-old to understand. As I've matured, so has my understanding, but the full extent of understanding I hope to never know. Later that evening, after the firewood was cut and I helped Tommy with a few more chores, he showed me the machete he had used. Tommy told me he never used the machete again. He said he placed it on the bottom of his footlocker and brought it home. Where in his trailer he kept it, I was never told. Often I've wondered why he kept it. I never asked that question, though he had his reasons, I'm sure. And that same machete is at the core of my experience. Tommy lived next door to his parents the rest of their lives. They both died within a year of each other in the early 2000s. It was in March of 2006 when Tommy died. He had several problems with his health, and it eventually caused his death. I visited as often as I could, but being married with 4 children of my own left little time to socialize. Tommy died in his trailer one Sunday morning. The coroner wasn't sure as to the cause, and no autopsy was performed because foul play wasn't suspected, but it was believed he died after suffering a stroke. I still wonder if he had a nightmare that was so severe it caused his stroke. The spirit of the lieutenant haunting his dreams. I guess that sounds like foolishness, but who knows? A few years after Tommy's death, my nephew bought his trailer and land. Of course, he was aware that Tommy died in the trailer, and I suppose that is one reason Tommy's family had trouble selling the place. But it was such a good price, my nephew couldn't pass it up. It was one late afternoon when I walked next door to visit with my nephew that something happened, and it still brings chills to my body when I think about it. Friday afternoon, late October, just before 6 p.m., I walked to Tommy's trailer to visit my nephew. It was dark, like it always gets on Fletcher Lane at night. But even in the dark, I noticed something odd. Above the trailer and towards the middle, there seemed to be a large cloud of smoke. My nephew didn't have a chimney or stovepipe extending above the roof, so I was somewhat curious. At first, I thought maybe he had started a fire in the backyard. I made my way to the rear of the trailer, but there was no fire. I didn't smell the pungent scent of a fire either. Then I realized my nephew wasn't home from work yet. Suddenly, I thought the trailer itself was on fire. I quickly surveyed the outside and saw nothing that indicated the trailer was burning. I called my nephew on my cell phone, but for some reason, there was no signal. I found this perplexing because there was a satellite antenna just half a mile away, and I knew he should be on the way home. After a few more attempts to contact my nephew, I decided there was no imminent danger. Had the trailer been on fire, I would have seen a blaze or something by then. It was totally dark by now. The moon was full and bright. There was some illumination coming through the kitchen window, so I sat on the back doorsteps, stared at the sky, and waited. Given the time of night, I knew my nephew would be home soon, just a couple hours before I had talked to him. So I put everything aside from my thoughts and sat quietly waiting. I'm not sure why I decided to wait there in the dark. Usually I would have walked back to my house across the street and came back later, but I didn't. Several minutes passed before something happened. It sent a shiver through my body, and I felt a presence. It wasn't exactly like how you feel when you think you're being watched. It was more like the sensation when you're alone at night in your bedroom. The door is closed and you're trying to sleep, but you suddenly feel as though someone is in the room with you. It's the kind of feeling that causes you to lay there, motionless, afraid to move or speak. And the longer you think about the sensation, the more intense it becomes. I couldn't move my head to look around the backyard. I could make out the shapes of bushes and the 2 trees in the yard, but I could see nothing in the darkness around them. The darkness took on the personification of shadows, like they were living beings dressed in the blackness of the night, hiding. I just felt petrified. My body is motionless and quiet. Then, without warning, I heard it. But there was no sound in the yard, no sound behind the trees or bushes. It came from inside the trailer. It was in the bedroom, just beyond the reach of the back door, and it startled me. I listened intently, not as much from curiosity, but rather forcefully. From the volume and direction of the sound, it seemed to be coming from the bedroom closet. A faint sound of scuffling, moving small things around. The sounds weren't constant. There were breaks between them, and the sounds weren't loud. If I were to start talking on the phone, I don't think I could have heard them. This lasted a few minutes. Then there was silence again. My back was to the back door. Behind the back door, in the trailer, was the small laundry area. To the right of the laundry area was the master bedroom, the same room I heard the noises in, the same room where Tommy died. Moments of silence quickly surrendered to a different nature of sound. The doorway from the bedroom to the laundry area was just a couple feet from the back door. What I heard next was even more startling. It sounded like footsteps, and after each step there was a dragging noise, as if someone were walking across the bedroom and towards the bedroom doorway, the dragging of feet with each step. Again, the sounds were faint, almost undetectable. Then the sounds changed, like walking on carpet, then onto a hard floor. And when the sound reached the back door, just behind where I sat, it stopped. Again, there was silence. My heart was pounding, and my hands shook. I didn't think I could catch my breath. Deep within my thoughts, I wanted to turn and look, but I couldn't. The thought of something glaring at me through the small window in the door circled in my mind. An intense and indescribable sensation gripped me, like the feeling of being watched but more realistic than before. almost as if it were stalking me. Waiting for the right moment then, when all is calm, attacking. An attack with such a voracious need, the aftermath would be epic. How long this feeling and the silence lasted, I do not know. All sense of time was drawn from me. Eventually the silence ended. Then I heard them again, but now they were going in the direction of the kitchen. The quiet, slow, almost ominous sound of footfalls and feet being slid across the floor. There was a part of me that wanted this to be my imagination. The wind is playing tricks on my mind. Yet there were no winds. The night was calm and still. Brief were the sounds going into the kitchen, brief and then nothing again. Listening without the desire to hear, I waited. There were no more footfalls, no dragging or sliding of feet across the floor, nothing. My eyes remained fixated on the shadows in the backyard, those areas of darkness where anything could be hiding and would go undetected. I simply stared as my thoughts pondered the idea that something could be lurking within the pitch of night. Something could be waiting in the trailer. It was at that moment, just as my nephew's truck turned into the driveway, I saw it. From somewhere to my right, behind a tree beside the trailer, maybe, in some way, through the window from inside the trailer, it moved. Describing its movement is difficult. I cannot say it flew, there were no wings, but it moved fast, in the blink of an eye. It moved towards me and then straight up into the dark sky. It was the size of a basketball, white but not solid white. I'd never in my life seen anything that resembled this thing. I call it a thing because I am beyond any doubt positive it was no object. Though I feel it was no tangible object, I am at a loss to determine what the nature of its composition could be. The following day I contacted a friend who currently lives in Colorado. He conducts paranormal investigations and has had many experiences with situations of this nature. I explained to Sam what I had experienced and what I saw. He directed me to his website, and there I saw photos of things that resembled the thing that moved through the air. I also saw things that resembled the white cloud above the trailer when I walked from across the street. When I explained what photos resembled the thing I saw, he told me that it is an orb. When I saw it on the roof, it appeared as a supercharged orb. A supercharged orb is the manifestation of a spirit in a mist-like form with a pink, blue, or green hue. What I saw as I sat on the back steps was an ecto-orb. As I recalled the thing moving through the air, it almost seemed as though it had a face. It's difficult to be sure because it happened so quickly. But an ecto-orb will at times attempt to manifest itself to resemble what it looked like while in human form. These terms and descriptions were offered to me from my friend. I'm not certain as to who this orb was. But there was one last thing that my nephew and I discovered that night, and it was this that frightened me more than anything else. After my nephew pulled his truck to the rear of his trailer, I explained what had taken place. He of course thought I was crazy, laughing as he invited me inside. After going through the back doorway, he went into the kitchen. I wandered into his bedroom. I couldn't tell if anything was out of place or not, but after a few seconds my nephew called for me. His voice was somewhat nervous and alarmed. I made my way into the kitchen, where he was standing beside the breakfast counter, his back to me. He seemed to be staring at the countertop. When I walked around to his side so I could see the countertop, I saw what he was staring at. It was the machete, the same one Tommy had shown me years before. My nephew was bewildered, as was I. He asked me if I had placed the machete there, to which I replied, no, of course. But the chill running through my veins was so profound I could barely stand. It was at that moment I realized what and who I saw. It was Tommy, or rather his ghost or spirit or whatever term one may apply. Because of our close relationship, I suppose he was attempting to make contact, trying to let me know he was still here. That's why I sometimes wonder to what extent emotions play in the manifestation of spirits. That was several months ago. I have not seen any signs of Tommy since then. Even though my nephew threw the machete away, he discarded any idea of a supernatural or paranormal event, rather deciding one of his girlfriend's children had found the machete and placed it on the countertop. Both children denied the accusation. But I cannot find this rationale within my conscious thoughts. What I sensed and felt was real. What I saw was real. And since then, there are nights, as I lay in bed in the darkness of my room, I hear things. At times, objects will fall from my dresser or my bookshelf. Objects that have no known force causing them to fall. I wonder if it's Tommy. I wonder if he's lonely and attempting to let me know he's here. One thing I do know, and this I feel beyond a shadow of a doubt, the living are not alone. The spirits are among us.